So welcome to SAGindie's fourth edition of our Working Through Zoom panel discussions. My name is Michael Sládek, and I'm the New York consultant for SAGindie, which is a nonprofit independent organization that helps bridge the gap between independent filmmakers and SAG-AFTRA. I'm joined today by an excellent group of seasoned professionals with diverse backgrounds. We brought them together to focus on the current state of development, financing, sales, and distribution in the indie film space. What I'm going to do is read some quick bios as quickly as I can, so I'm not talking too much, but it'll be me for a few minutes here as I kind of introduce everybody and what your backgrounds are, and then we'll jump into our discussion. So beginning in order, Milan Chakraborty is currently the head of film at cross-platform content studio, Marginal Media Works. He's produced numerous feature films, including My Friend Dahmer, Assassination Nation, Plus One, The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, The Dark and the Wicked, and Rearranged. He began his career in the production, finance, and accounting departments at Warner Brothers and New Line, where he served on production teams for Batman Begins, Superman Returns, V for Vendetta, and A History of Violence. Next up, Pauline Fischer has produced, acquired, or greenlit critically acclaimed projects, including Okja, Bright, Death Note, A Very Murray Christmas, Beasts of No Nation, First They Killed My Father, The Two Popes, Murder Mystery, Claws, and The Colony, Dolomite. An architect of Netflix's original film group, she's also a founding board member of the Black House Foundation. Pauline is a graduate of UCLA, Harvard Law and Business Schools, and is an executive member of MPAS. Mr. Matt Grady is the founder of the production and distribution company Factory 25. Focusing on making and releasing under-the-radar films via traditional and non-traditional platforms. His recent releases include Ham on Rye, In the Soup, Tito, All This Panic, Ma, Little Sister, Christmas Again, Icaros, A Vision, Uncle Kent 2, Stinking Heaven, The Color Wheel, Sun Don't Shine, and Kid Thing. Matt also produced the features The Great Pretender, Inspector Ike, Applesauce, and Summer of Blood. Jonathan Gray served as production counsel on a multitude of films, including The Mole Agent, American Factory, One Child Nation, Life Animated, The Station Agent, Black Swan, and Precious. His producing credits include Truman in Tennessee, An Intimate Conversation, El Gran Fellow, Blue Caprice, Nightingale, and Dark Knight. An adjunct professor at Columbia University School of the Arts, Jonathan earned his JD from Fordham University School of Law.
El Gran Fayove.
Fayove, whoops, should have asked that. Caddy Vanasirikul is the head of acquisitions and productions at the global film sales and finance company, The Exchange, where she's worked on such films as Shimmer Lake, Irreplaceable You, After Everything, Tragedy Girls, Flower, and We the Animals. She's currently spearheading The Exchange's expansion into the development and production space, beginning with the feature film The Stand-In. Born and raised in Bangkok, she studied at UCLA and began her career in unscripted TV. So, we're going to jump straight into this chat now that we've introduced everyone, starting with development and financing, since that's a good place to start. And then we'll kind of segue into sales and distribution discussions. Not that we have to if you want to cross those currents, that's fine. But feel free to jump in at any point. As I said, this is just a discussion, and it can be a free for all to some degree. So my first question for all of you is, what kind of film projects do you think the big guys are developing and financing these days? Like what are we, we really focus on the independent sphere, the low budget independent sphere, but a lot of independent filmmakers, of course, the gold standards and the dream is to be working with the Netflixes and the Apples and the Amazons. Not every filmmaker's dream is to do that, but many see that as the route to successful careers and sustainable careers. So I'm curious if you have a thought of what kind of stuff the big guys are working on these days. Are they working in the independent film sphere?
Yeah, I can take that. Yes, so I work at the exchange. So we're constantly in conversation with buyers. We were just on with HBO Max and New Line and all the WB group last week, and it seems to us that they're looking right now for feel good, given what we went through last year. So feel good comedy, you know, kind of escape movie. That's kind of what we're looking for. Recently.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I think I might add, sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, please, Pauline.
I was just going to say, I would add to that, it feels like they're looking for things with diversity, right? So I think that's been a long conversation over the last year. And so they're looking for projects with multicultural casts or with specific casts. So specifically for African-American or Latino or Asian American audiences as well. And I feel like that there's a big demand for those types of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even some company made it like a corporate mandate, right? Like, you know, we have an offer from a big company in the UK that said, you know, these have to be 50%, you know, like, you know, diversity also inclusive of the people behind the scene too, you know, the head of departments and, you know, with women and with diverse, you know, people. So we see that too. And I think you raised a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the UK, the British Film Institute is requiring for a lot of the work that they're doing that there be 50% or, you know, a certain number of diverse folks, both above and below the line. So it's really interesting as well. Sorry, I cut you off again, Jonathan.
No, you're actually echoing, you know, about my sentiments I found not only on the cast front, but also, you know, below the line, and also directors and writers and like that. I'm wondering, and this is probably most relevant to you, Caddy. I mean, I'm assuming that, you know, feel good, you know, comedies, etc. It's still very star driven in terms of the content that folks are looking for.
I think yes. You know, I feel like we're getting out of that a little bit, which is I think good for the independent filmmakers. I think now it's more concept driven than star driven, but you know, if you're targeting the worldwide, it doesn't really matter because they said like we work everyone in the world, we have a movie with them, you know, so it doesn't matter that they have a hit show and on Netflix because they have everyone's movie. But on the international side, like if we do have to go territory by territory, it still has to be a little bit of an anchor cast. But yeah, like, you know, like coming of age, like domestic driven comedy, like we're not touching as much, even though we did Obvious Child and Dear White People and all that. Like we're looking for a little bit more of a bigger setup. You know, doesn't have to be like huge movie, but I think like higher concept, which I feel like everyone looks for anyway. So
I feel like I've been stuck in Groundhog Day, seeing the spate of Groundhog Day movies that have been coming out one after the other.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's a bit of a lay of the land of that. So, is there, in terms of financing and development, how are you guys feeling about the state of like for smaller films, institutional nonprofit money? Is that out there anymore for small films?
You talking about grants, Michael?
Yeah,
basically.
Grants, development process, you know, processes that actually include money to make the film.
Yeah, I work principally, as you know, in documentaries now, which I know isn't typically SAG-AFTRA relevant, although there's SAG-AFTRA agreements that cover documentary films. There's an abundance, obviously, of you know, grants, you know, monies available. I have seen it cross over. You know, I've typically found those grant monies are applicable and you know, also in the narrative world, you know, to more cause, you know, driven, you know, films, you know, and certainly films that, you know, are engaged in diverse hiring practices, you know, and like that. So, you know, if you had a film that was, you know, centered on a you know, a principal character with, you know, certain disabilities, my expectation would be, yeah, you can go to, you know, essentially the same types of sources that work in the documentary world in terms of, you know, grant funding.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Matt, at the level of the films that you've been dealing with, have you found that a lot of the smaller budget movies, are they coming in with money from CineReach or other places anymore? Or is that
I actually think it's harder right now than it has been. I don't want to be like the downer, but like it actually, it's been tough. Some of like the people that I usually can get some funding out of, they're, you know, taking a break or looking a little closer at projects, and it's moving still a little slow. And the other thing is, I mean, at this point in the pandemic, doing low budget films is costing potentially a lot more than it would have like a year ago. I mean, a lot more.
Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, I think we understand what you're talking about, but what do you mean?
Sure. I mean, just with kind of like, I mean, the SAG rules, and even down to like the nitty gritty, like with, you know, serving meals, everyone has to have their individual meals. You can't like have anyone touching anyone else's food. You have to kind of, for the actors, have separate rooms for them, and like there's just a lot more. Oh, and you have to, and individual testing every 72 hours, I think it's where it's at right now. You know, if you have decent sized crew and cast, you know, that's $125 per person, and you have to have someone there all day. So it adds up. And if we're like, some of my projects like that I produced like right before this, you know, had like a $60,000 budget or $100,000 budget, and adding that adds like a huge percentage to the budget.
Right.
So I mean, I think a lot of people that are like kind of were looking to do that size film, a lot of them are still waiting to kind of do that, because it adds like a lot to the budget.
I think it's interesting. The sort of flip side of that coin is SAG-AFTRA was in certain regard ahead of the game. I mean, they were applying these very stringent COVID protocols to production, which makes perfect sense. But you know, we shot a couple of films over the summer, you know, that I did some work on, which surprised me. Matt is 100% right. The you know, the cost of complying with those protocols, you know, one of them was a short. I think it was probably cost them $20,000-$30,000 on what would have been a $70,000 short. You know, but you know, on the flip side of that, you know, they did get up and running relatively quickly.
Yeah, I did 4 films during the pandemic, and it was like the films that I used to do, the $1 to $2 million mark, that a couple that I had financed, I had to push, but it was making everything smaller, because safety is never negotiable. And if you can only keep people safe for about 3 to 5 days, well, I've been talking about micro budget financing for the last 5 years, but I just rebranded micro budget financing to COVID friendly, because micro budget is one location, limited characters, takes place over the course of the night. And I think between that, section 168K of the tax code, which is like a variation of what was section 181, where it's a write-off. Now it doesn't follow the expense, it goes with distribution. I should always preface, and you know, well, Jonathan, are you considered a former lawyer, or are you
No, I have not. I've not retired.
Okay, yet.
But I do not give tax advice. Please consult your professional. But getting those write-offs, and now there's different tax credits. Kentucky just brought theirs back a couple months ago. Northwest Arkansas, like St. Louis County and Minnesota, little pockets for low-budget films that could still be a asset to kind of absorb some of these overages, and also brand integration. You know, a lot of brands, they don't know where to spend their money right now, because traditional advertising has been it's out of, you know, the traditional newspapers, and that doesn't work, and they can't get on to Netflix and Hulu and that kind of stuff, and HBO, because there's no traditional advertising. So if you can get like authentically brand integrate a project, and we did, one of the micro budgets was called Rosé All Day, and we got a rosé, you know, company to give us some cash, you know, in exchange, you know, for, you know, mutual promotion and that kind of stuff. So where there's a will, there's a way, but it's definitely different types of projects. That traditional 3 to 5 week Sundance style picture that's $1 to $2 million, that's a really tough space to be in, because where your expenses are going to start going off the screen. And
yeah, so it's a good segue, because what I wanted to really jump into was, you know, almost every time, well, when we used to do these sort of live things with Q&As or whatever for films or anything, invariably someone in the audience, if we go to audience questions, will get up and say, how do you finance a movie? Where do you find your money? Well, how do you do this? You know, and it's sort of the mystery behind most movies is, where does the money come from? So if you're not making a film that's financed by a studio, which is, you know, pretty much the folks that we're talking about and to right now, where's money coming from? Where you know, is there aside from, you know, brand integration is a way of kind of bumping up your budget perhaps, or where is the actual cash coming from these days?
find out who invested in Bitcoin.
It's actually truth to that.
It's actually true.
No, I was going to say it's funny, but it is. It's wealthy individuals now, right, who are putting a lot of money into, into films. It seems creating their own investment vehicles and putting some money in is where I'm finding some of it is coming from, right? And I think we'll see how long it lasts. I think there's always these waves of people wanting to get in and invest, and I think in the short term it probably makes a lot of sense, and then longer term we'll see how long they last. But it's nice to have, because to your point, I think the banks aren't investing the way that they used to with all of these COVID restrictions and the cost of insurance and all these other things. And so I do think that these financiers have come in at a good time, because I feel like that's where the most activity is in the independent space. Because I'm curious what Caddy might think, but I think the international sales piece of it is really challenged right now.
Yeah, I have very different kind of ideas, because most of our films, because we have the sales arm and operation, most of our films are financed based on sales, pre-sale. So before the movie's made, and 70% of our slate is all packages and not finished film. So we put together movies, that way. We did like 5 movies in the pandemic as well. Those are all very specific, meaning they're very programmer. So all of our films that are ranged from 5 to 10 million during the pandemic is solely financed, mostly like 95% or sometimes 100% financed based on sales. But those are programmers, which means, they are things that, like with the specific stars, you can go on our IMDb and see that, you can program with the international distributors. But on the independent side, just to go back to the last question too, in terms of, grant, like I feel like there's not a lot of them, which is why we launch Next Production, which is a development fund only, because we are competing with the same packages, with other sales agents, with other production companies. So we feel the need to invest, into projects early. And there are other ways we do it. Sometimes there's a project that could be good for, a graphic novel. So you pre-sold some of the rights that are not non-traditional to get money to develop your stuff. I have a project that I'm selling the rights to that, and they basically almost like an MG, like a minimum guarantee for those rights. And they go and they can create a graphic novel, and I just use that money to pay the casting director or do the budget or things like that. But yeah, in terms of the financing, most of our stuff, we also launch a fund called Origin Entertainment that finance our own sales. So we usually always, number one, is to launch it at a marketplace or and try to secure distribution as part of the majority of the financing of our films. And then the rest, like you said, go to fill it up with equity, with the rich, wealthy individuals that we also have a network of people we work with, but always kind of anchor it by sales so that we reduce the equity and the risk for the investor.
I think even Michael, taking a step back from that, and I've had such frustrations over 25 plus years in the business when I see packages pass my plate. Now I'm not a film financier, but I've worked with many filmmakers over the years, sort of putting together those packages. This is a statement of the obvious, or it should be. It's all about the work. I've seen so many packages land with me. I'm talking about pitch packages, and decks that are just clip art and don't even begin to express the story. And whether it's a check for $1 million or $1, I would say unfortunately the majority of materials that I've seen historically, how do I say this politely, are crap. And I'm a nice guy, but it's really important that the work be spent there. Whether it be the development of the script and spending time figuring out who your market may be. I'm not saying you need to pander to the dumbest person in the back of the room, but understanding what the market for your film, may be. Understanding I'm not referring to tokenism here, but understanding what the marketplace is now with respect to the diversity and the importance of that, and also just putting together materials that when you get that proverbial one bite at the apple, knock them off their socks, put together a deck that's representative of your project. And it takes time and energy and often money as well. I'm literally sitting next to this. Is completely self-serving. I'm doing a Dean Martin project. This is the deck for it. We did it as a record album, and you open the deck and it tells the entire, story. It's 4-hour docuseries complete with ephemera. Now, it didn't cost as much money as one would think, seeing how showy it is. This is self-serving. It just took the time, and it took surrounding, myself with people, who are better at a lot of stuff than I am, that's for sure. And it makes all the difference in the world. when someone actually, opens a package and they say, "Man, God," the greatest compliment is, "I don't understand. You made this?" And it's like, yeah, so I think a threshold issue here, which I found, that a lot of folks unfortunately fail at, is really, being thoughtful about the process and not wasting folks, time. And again, you'd hope it was a statement of the obvious, but I still see now. I'm moving into the more of the producing side. I'm still seeing these packages where it's the same clip art and the same list of prospective actors who it might as well say these are actors we won't get, and then a bunch of comps for films that have nothing to do with their film. So I know I've said a lot of things here, but you just need to be really thoughtful about the process and engage with folks. It doesn't mean you have to hire all of them who understand the business or certain aspects of the business perhaps better than you do.
Right, this is sales aspect.
I want to piggyback on that. I'm glad you took a step back. I think respecting the process is so important, and especially, I don't know exactly who the audience is out there, but a lot of people we all just want to get our movie made, but I think also protecting the ecosystem. Indie film is a fragile ecosystem, and it's not a binary, for me to win, you have to lose. I'm rooting for every other indie filmmaker. Each time we lose, it's bad for the whole system. So each time I say, just because you can raise money doesn't mean you should. Each time someone loses somebody, I spend a lot of my time telling investors why not to invest in a film. Because if I start there and then pull them back on my risk mitigation, what I'm trying to do, then, because the amount of times I also get decks and they're like, yeah, we're going to make this and most likely it'll be at Sundance. And it's like, Jonathan's had an unbelievable amount of movies at Sundance. I've had 3. That's not just something that you can assume. And it's like, that's not sharing. If you share with people, the cash flow cycles 18 to 36 months, it's like, it's reasonable expectations, because what you have is somebody will be like, most people I come to, they're like, oh yeah, I invested in film once. I lost all my money. It's a dumb investment. And then I start talking about things like tax credits and tax incentives and this and that and my own track record. And then they're like, oh, and I was like, well, maybe. And then I was like, who did that first film? And it's like, oh, it's my nephew. It's like, maybe that was the problem. And not respecting the process is an important part of that. So I'm glad Jonathan took a step back.
Also, managing expectations and I'm a lawyer for 30 years. Transparency is fundamental as well. When my classes, I always say any good investor agreement says you're going to lose your money, you're going to lose your money, you're going to lose your money, make check payable to blank. Now, it's more eloquent than that, and it comes with other materials. But it's important to put in front of people the nature and the significance of the risk involved. And what they have to believe more than anything is that you're going to give your blood and everything you have and be as thoughtful as possible in executing on what you're promising to execute on.
And with making decks, some of the decks that come across my desk, like if you're making a deck, make sure the photos are at the right aspect ratio. It's like simple things like that. Like so many, they're like stretched and look at and spell check and like so many, like I feel like are thrown together. Like, oh, from like the first page, oh, this could be good, and then like it just goes down. I mean, people just need to take care and put time into them. Yeah.
And often overwritten and just too much word, and people don't have time to read. Yeah.
I think the challenge, Michael, before you move on, just really quickly, the challenge is just in this environment that we're talking about, where the funding is a little bit challenged, and we talked a little bit about development. There's a lot of things in development. Writers are in very high demand. If you have this one chance, which Jonathan alluded to, this one chance to get funding or to get a writer or a director excited about it, it needs to look good. So I think we're belaboring the point about written materials, but I think it can't go without saying that this is your chance to actually get somebody excited about your project, and you shouldn't blow that opportunity.
Yeah.
So why do you think equity financiers even invest in films? What do you think the reasons for most people who come into these films? What are they doing for?
I mean, supporters of the arts, in large regard. I question, I'm not a fine arts person by any means. I've been to gallery exhibitions where people paid 6 figures for a piece of art that I literally am seeing as an off-white canvas. You guys probably know who this artist is, like off-white canvas, $600,000. Like don't exactly know why, except that, I don't think it's a completely magnanimous action. Folks want to understand what, the prospect is of recouping their, their money. But it's not that different than, going to a movie, except it's a lot more expensive and you get to be involved in the, in the process. And some folks do it because they want to end up at Sundance. They want to see their name, in lights. And hopefully folks want to get involved in a project. And not every film is going to be a meaningful sort of, impactful film. I had the opportunity, as you mentioned, to work on Precious, to work on a lot of documentaries that did change, the world ostensibly. That can be part of it as well, is that you are making a film that is, sort of, message driven or cause driven or, like that. I mean, there's a lot of reason that folks would get involved. It's also a matter of finding those investors that are aligned with the film that you're trying, to make. If it's a film that's serving a particular community, then it would behoove you to sort of explore prospective financiers, in that, community. If it's a film about, about a championship skier, then, I mean, do your research and find out who may, there's a lot of billionaire skiers out there. I'm not, I'm not being cute here. I think it's just about the thoughtfulness in the work and figuring out who your audience is and then, connecting all those dots together.
Yeah, finding investors, I tell people it's a listening exercise, and it's a listening exercise that sometimes takes place over the course of years. The more you understand what the why for the other person, so I put investors in kind of two funnels. There's the ROI investor. How am I going to make my money back? All right, we know what we need to do, how we're mitigating risks. If we're talking to people like Caddy, what's the international value? Okay, we've done that. The other is what we call our ROE investor, and that's return on experience. So it could be the Sundance, it could be the cause, it could be the patron of the arts, and it's sometimes very specific to a cause or something like that. So the more you listen, whether it's to a private investor or to buyers, and I feel like too many people have their one project and they throw it everywhere they go. They're pitching that same thing the exact same way instead of tailoring it to the person receiving it. Mm-hmm. So the more we listen versus talk, the better off we are in the long game.
Good advice.
So in terms of adding sort of whether it's tax incentives or actors, casts, how do we feel about either the effect of chasing tax incentives or the effect of chasing, A-list actors on independent films? Like, at what point does it either negatively affect the production or the creative portion of making these films?
Funny, I feel like we're dealing with this right now, Michael, in certain regard. I mean, certainly, if you're shooting a film that's set in a desert, upstate New York, where you're getting an extra 5% of the tax credit, it's probably not going to, work out. With that said, there is obviously enormous value to these tax credits, whether you're monetizing them as part of the financial structure or in a straight equity play. In New York, and this is a little bit of caveman math, the tax credit's worth about 20% of the gross budget, more or less. So you're able to step into an equation where you can actually assure your equity investors that they're going to receive at least 20% back on their money if you're not monetizing the tax credit. That's not nothing. At least they're getting something back, in the worst case scenario. But again, certainly, taking advantage of the benefit in Kentucky, but you have a film set in Tokyo, probably not the best idea. Like, that stuff is pretty straightforward. You can only be so, creative. I'll always remember, and I don't know if this is tax incentive related, but a Jackie Chan movie called Rumble in the Bronx, and the big sort of climactic scene on a building in the Bronx, and in the background, they didn't bother even taking it out, are the Canadian Rockies. It's like, wow, that's a different angle on the Bronx. So sure, it can, sink the ship creatively, but I don't think anyone would, you wouldn't, the thoughtful producer wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of actors, how do you guys feel about people spend a lot of time chasing big names that they think are going to make their film sell or not?
Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Just for us, because we approach things from the value and distribution and sales. So usually we tell producers to just have a budget, and obviously we'd like them to go to a tax incentive state, because that means that you have to do less sales to cover those parts, since the revenue is coming in from the state. or countries. But we usually have them, done the budget, and then, okay, let's say if your, below the line budget is X, and we can kind of guide them direct, like, if you don't want, like, this actor, and we're like, okay, but you're never going to get the sales to cover your budget, or the other way around. So for us, like, we advise, creatively, we'll trust the producers, if it's not an in-house project, and then we'll give them a list of, like, these are the people you need to get, at least, to cover your budget. So in terms of chasing actors, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of big actors that are actually pretty friendly in the indie space. We've had a lot of good experience on that, but yes, like, sometimes we need to be realistic. But we always approach it on the value standpoint too. Yes, protect the investors, and also protect you and protect the ecosystem, like what Milan was talking about, so that you can keep making movies again and again.
I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of valuing actors, it's an interesting, it's a strange science, or maybe it's an art, I'm not sure. The notion that there are, maybe a handful of actors that are really worth something in a marketplace, let alone a global marketplace. It's amazing, because you talk to people about casting, and often people will drop a name of an actor, and you look at them and say, that's a great actor, but they're not worth anything to a global marketplace. They might be great in your film, but it may not help you raise money or sell your film. So at what point are filmmakers, I guess the question is, at what point do you think filmmakers need to draw a line to what they're willing to do, or what they're supposed to do in terms of beefing up their packages?
I'll say, when I've been in so many rooms where folks will mention a movie star name, when there's no association or connection. And I think, how many different rooms all across the world is the same conversation taking place right now? And then you start to feel, mildly embarrassed. I've also been surprised on the flip side of that, the value of actors in certain territories, and Caddy's much more, and the Exchange are much more expert at this than I am, for sure. But, I've had films, financed because Michelle Trachtenberg was in it. This is back in the day when Buffy the Vampire Slayer was huge. I'd never even heard of her before. And the film was financed, not a huge film, but $1 million and change. And Ryan Felipe was huge in Asia for years, which I had no idea. Like, so, working with folks, and it's tough, understandably, to get anyone's, attention. I mean, the Exchange is a top foreign, sales company. To be able to engage with them to do estimates based upon talent, you sort of got to get in line to a certain, extent, because if they did it for everybody, it's like me as a lawyer. Like, I'm a generous person, but at some point you got to say no to somebody. So, again, surrounding yourself with people who know more than you do, I think, is important. And also the manner in which you structure your deals on these films is fundamental to being able to secure, the talent. And I have produced, too many films to remember at this point. And we've had many scenarios in which we had actors whose fee quotes were bigger than the budget of the film, and they would never do it unless they responded to the material, of course, and responded to the director, of course. And then if you can actually negotiate a deal and structure a deal that's equitable and, again, transparent, where that actor may have a core, and I mean that in a gender neutral sense, but that actor may have a corridor alongside the equity. Well, you're much more likely to be able to close a deal with the actor than having some amorphous, net participation or like that. So, and again, that also involves having a, sophisticated producer, or counsel that understands the machinations of how the system works and how you can actually be able to close a deal after you may be able to get the attention, of the talent through a casting director, which another part of the conversation is, how do you actually even get the attention of the actor?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think from the perspective of streamers, certainly my experience at Netflix, right, where you didn't necessarily have to give corridors, because that's just not how the deals were structured, but you could say that the talent in some ways wasn't as important from a global perspective, right? Because you had time for the film to find an audience, you had a platform that wasn't looking for returns on an opening weekend, and et cetera, right? So some of the demands that are caused, that, why you need the talent to drive revenue in the theatrical window to help the ancillary revenue, you don't need that in a streaming context. So the demand, the need for star talent is less. I don't want to say it's zero, because it's not true, right? So if you go to any streaming service, and we all know this, you turn it on, there's a bunch of stuff to watch, right? So how do you sift through as a user to, or as somebody, a viewer, to find something? So the talent does help in some way, in that way. So it's not zero, but it's not, I think, as key as it perhaps had been even just a few years ago.
Yeah, and I going to say something.
Yeah, I think they did a great job of covering. It just goes back to the ROI, ROE. If it's the ROI component and you got to get their money back and that kind of stuff and do it. But a lot of my little indies, they haven't been based on international values. So there's kind of like when people say A-list, that, well, look, even if that person's your uncle, they still have an agent and a manager and that are going to get in your way and they want their paycheck. And if you want to make that type of movie, go ahead. But then there's like, well, who's Sundance A-list? And, look at the last few years of the festivals and it's like, okay, they seem to be attracted to Catherine Hahn, there's incredible actors. I think sometimes people get too caught up in the names and stuff like that. And one that, a couple years ago, which it came out last year, a movie that we did, Dark and the Wicked. And I'll throw this to Caddy. There's nothing about it that says international. Brian Bertino, who did The Strangers, directed it. And we stripped away all the extras and he did it on the farm he grew up on outside of Fort Worth. So we didn't take advantage of tax credits and that kind of stuff. But what I do, I call it value-based filmmaking. The implicit, a distributor doesn't care how much you spent. They care how much they value it. And so we got our MGs, we made a profit, and now Caddy is crushing it on the international side, but it wasn't built on that. It was about the script and execution. We got into Tribeca and Fantasia. It knew its audience, and it knew its audience really well. So sometimes when Michelle Trachtenberg is the best actress for your audience, or you work backwards from there. So I get people too often that are stuck on A-list. And I was like, eventually your investor is going to be disappointed because you came with all these names and then you ended up with a great actor, but it wasn't one of those names. So they're going to think you did a bait and switch. Yeah. So understanding what you have and who your audience is and working backwards from there.
So in terms of the idea of audience as well, I mean, for a while, everybody was talking about niche audiences, right? And maybe they're still talking about it, but the ability for all of us to go to those niche audiences that like those certain types of movies, Matt, a lot of the films that you handle are certainly niche audience films or sort of art. Maybe art's the wrong word, but like there's a very like sort of underground feel to a lot of the movies that you work with. And they're like, Kentucker Audley and these people, there are certain sort of stars, if you want to call them, that mom and pop in Kansas have never heard of, but people in LA and New York have heard of and love, certain people's films. And do you find that those, I mean, I'm sure it's hard to sell all of these films and to make money back on all these films, but is the niche still really a thing, and is there a market out there for those things?
I mean, I definitely think the niche is a thing and there's a market. I don't think it's an easy market. I mean, like a lot of my films, I have had Kentucky Audley in a bunch of films. Caitlin Shield's been in like 6, 7 of my films. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. I think people that know her, but like, I think that's kind of, where that is. But I do think I've been able to, like, with my films, like find the audience. I mean, I know what theaters are going to play them. I usually know like what buyers, like who to like send it to, like at the streamers or like that. I have a good idea who will like it. And I know sometimes it's going to be hard, but like usually it can keep like rolling and doing it. And now I have, like, for me specifically, like I have a pretty big catalog of like American micro budget, like super micro budget indies. Mm-hmm. Like I've been selling to different places, like in Europe and things like that. So that, like, being able to package a bunch of them together has like helped me. And like, even when I'm looking at like new films now, yeah, I mean, I definitely think about that. Like, oh, will I be able to package this with my other films and like in the future? Mm-hmm.
So, and Milan, you brought up Sundance, of course. So how do we feel about whether do festivals still define the market?
No, You can
Leading
look.
questions.
I love that Coda sold for 25 million and this and all that. But yeah, that's where, as Jonathan referenced earlier, having someone on your team that cares about the boring stuff is a very important thing. Having someone on your team that's walked through films from distribution, film festivals to distribution is important part, because it's all reverse engineering. The game is rigged, but you can rig it in your favor. And as much as we love those big sales that come out of Sundance, we don't really hear many big sales come out of South by and Tribeca, even though there's been some decent ones. But say 120 films get into Sundance, say we hear about 5 to 10, there's still 75, 80 other films that have been on the top of the mountain. But what happened to them? They're getting $0 MG offers. So yes, it's a great place. I still believe in it. It's incredible for our community. But that's where, if you need to ask yourself the tough questions early on and have a plan. Sundance or bust is not a plan.
No.
And if it gets into Sundance, great. But how do you execute? You know, I did the first film with the national release to star a person with Down syndrome that came out in 2015. That little film, no big stars, no big film festivals, did 1.2 million in the box office. So big success, and even did 500,000 internationally. So I recognize there were 400,000 people, and the whole team recognized 400,000 people with Down syndrome in the country. That meant 400,000 families and advocacy groups. And we built up through a big team, built up over 500,000 Facebook fans, and we found the audience, and they went out to theaters, and that was the plan from the beginning. So I love the festivals. And Jonathan knows how much I love the festivals.
Enough said, Milan.
But it's been a long time. I've been in Chattanooga.
I miss you, brother.
For 14 months. I'm coming to New York next week. Yeah, it's just like that Sundance or bust plan. As much as we love it, and as much as books are written about it, it's like, please have another plan too.
Yeah, and one really practical bit of advice in terms of the Sundance or bust or any festival or bust philosophy. You know, I live in a post-production facility for over 20 years at this point, and invariably comes, you know, that couple of months before the deadlines pop up, and folks land in my office and say, you know, we've got to get our film done to submit to Sundance. And the good news is we have the fastest editor in the world, you know, or something like that. And it's like, oh my God, you spent years developing this project and you know, getting it to this point, and now you're going to operate hastily and race to the finish line and compromise your film to submit it to Sundance, where, you know, I've had films play Sundance and then not get into the Tallahassee Kosher Butcher Film Night. Like, it's completely subjective by definition. And by the way, the film that you're so proud of, whether Sundance takes it or not, it's still the same movie, you know, whatever that stamp of approval and validation means. So you got to serve the film, not the festival. And a lot of folks lose sight of that and will literally crash their ship into the rocks to try to adhere to a Sundance deadline.
And you brought up the big Coda sales. So, you know, let's talk about big sales like that. I mean, what do we think of those sales? What are those? Why does that happen? And what do we think of you know, a film that may sell? I'm not saying Coda in particular, but a film that may sell in huge amounts of money, but not make that money back in the box office or whatever you know may deem. Is that hurting smaller films? Is it sucking up too much, you know, wind? You know, how do these things happen?
This is where it's terrifying that this is being recorded. This is one of those, hey, can we have the editor go back? Because I have no clue what I'm about to say. But I'll let somebody else go first.
Yeah, well, so I'll jump in. Having been a buyer at Sundance for many years, I would say that, you know, there's a lot of really beautiful films. There are a lot of art, and not just Sundance, right? At most film festivals, there's a lot of art, and then there's some commerce to be had there, right? And so you end up with bidding wars for the things that people think are the most, you know, air quotes here, commercial. And every year there's, you know, 3 to 5 of those at any film festival, and those are the ones that get the attention. They get the multiple offers, and they get the big wins coming out of the festival with all of the caveats that we've already discussed. I think what happens is, and those things don't then perform, is that they become comps, right? And then the next year, the buyers become a little bit more gun shy on paying higher. So instead of it being 3 to 5 films, it might be 1 to 2 films that they might take a swing on. And so it just erodes the confidence in the market and their ability to gauge things coming out of film festivals. Everybody talks about the high, literally the high of the altitude of Sundance, and people are super excited when something screens really well there, and then it potentially doesn't perform. And I think for them, for Sundance, they just want a great experience. I think it's the rest of the ecosystem that's freaking out at the results of it. But I think all that to say is that it's not necessarily good long term if there's a big swing and a miss.
But I think it's fine for the producers, since like if the investor make the money back, then the producer's fine. So I don't know.
I will say, and I'm not that cynical a person, I don't believe half the numbers, frankly. I don't know that the 25 million was 25 million, or if it was 12 million and 13 in P&A. Like I just, I've had some, I certainly won't reveal any details because there's privilege involved, but I've had experiences where the published number is an extreme exaggeration that includes, marketing spends and like that. I think there's reasons, and certainly Pauline or probably Caddy could speak more to it than I can. There's other reasons that distributors will pay a lot of money for a film. Part of it is just sort of puffing out the chest and look, we're here. Part of it is the reporting and whatever comes, presuming it's just sort of making a mark, whatever it happens to be. And there are zeitgeist moments for these films. The AOC, I'm calling it the AOC doc because she was like a movie star when Bringing Down the House was sold for a reported $10 million, also at Sundance, I think. That was a moment in time, that, she was like literally a movie star, and not that she isn't now, but, and it was a moment politically, the stars just all aligned, and those conversations out in the hallway, who's ever engineering that, I think that was a Cinetic deal. It's also working with sales reps that know how to, play that game. I feel like John Cusack. I don't buy things. I don't sell things. I'm a lawyer all these years. I hire sales agents when I produce, films. But there's an art to that, as well.
Yeah, but for Coda, I think they need to unwind a lot of international deals. So maybe there's a cost to that as well because it was pre-sold independently.
Interesting. So we'll start wrapping this up. But I guess one of my big how do you feel, especially in the sales and distribution end? Because we talked about financing and development. Where does the filmmaker fit in the sales and the distribution end of things? How should filmmakers, do you have advice for filmmakers once they've already gotten their movie made and are going into this process that can, for many filmmakers, feel completely foreign, and suddenly they're, if they're lucky, they're dealing with a reputable sales company and a good festival. If they're not lucky to have those things, then they're on their own. And in either case, new filmmakers can often feel like they're, just kind of being rushed into rooms or not rushed into rooms, and figuring out how to navigate that world. Do you have any suggestions, any advice for folks?
Can I go first? Just because I work at a sales agent, and I have the sales agent kind of hat and also the producing hat because I also produce. But I always, like the idea of a film, and that's why part of it why we kind of do more packages than finished film. Finished film is what it is. You see it, and there's a price point, and it is just what it is. But if you, in an earlier side, you can kind of sell the dream or kind of try to make it as best as you can. And that also meaning like the way we sell to the distributor, the way you package it, the way you hire people for that film. So for us, like as a sales agent, we like to partner early, so we can be helpful, and we can work together. If it's a finished film, someone go and make the film and you see it and it's not great, it's just, we're not going to take it. We will make a bet, to win together. And even if we don't win, we will still be by your side, and kind of help you make the money back as much as we can. But if you come back as a finished product, it is what that is. And then, it's more likely they will pass if it's not great. Yeah.
I think to underscore what Caddy just said is that, when I talk to filmmakers, I tell them you have to plan for the distribution before you make the film, right? So, because if you get to the end of it and you don't have a sense for what it is that you want to do, you don't have a distribution plan. Am I going to take it to a festival? Am I going to sell it first? Am I going to, all those are decisions you need to make beforehand. Because to Caddy's point, you know, once the film is finished, or even once you've gone through some production and gotten the financing, you've made decisions whether you know it or not. And so you have to do that in the beginning, have a vision for what it is that you want in the end. And then, someone alluded to it, I apologize, I think it was Jonathan, that you need a good team. You need to surround yourself with people whose opinion you trust, whether that is the sales agent or you have a good attorney, or whomever it might be for you. I think you have to find somebody who you trust, because it will get crazy and you will have a lot of things coming at you and decisions you have to make quickly. And I think you need a team around you.
I'll echo those sentiments. The team is important. I would never presume to pick up a camera and shoot a film, nor should a filmmaker necessarily presume to lawyer the film or sell the film. I've been in the business for 30 years. I would never try to sell my own film. You know, it's just not my skill set, and I don't have that area of, of expertise. It's really important that you have folks for what Milan posited as the boring stuff. Milan, it's I will say it.
I love the boring stuff.
I do too. And it's, folks that over the years have said, and I produced a bunch of films, but, say like, you're thinking about getting involved in the creative side. I said, wait a second. Imagine making, working as production counsel in a film, where 5 actors, have quotes, higher than the budget of the film, and structuring those deals. There's a creative part to every side of the business, the legal side, the sales side, the production side, of course. And right back to what Pauline said, the most important thing is to understand from the outset who it is you're making the film for. If you're just making it for art's sake, God bless you. But don't try to raise money from financiers, with an investment agreement. Call it a contribution agreement. Get yourself a not-for-profit fiscal sponsor and at least get them, the benefit of providing those monies for the arts. There's nothing wrong with that.
And I think with sales agents, like with a lot of films like I deal with, like lower budget films, I mean, I think there's a group of great sales agents, but a lot of times, like if you don't have like big actors and things like that, sometimes I do think some films don't need sales agents, and like some filmmakers are so focused on getting a sales agent, and there are a lot of, and I think filmmakers just need to do their research of like about the sales agents, like what they've sold, what their background is. There are a lot of I don't want to say failed producers, but like ex-producers that like start sales agencies and like at like one South by or some other festival, like go after a bunch of films. I just think filmmakers really like need to do their research, make sure like they're like, sales agents that they can trust, that know what they're doing, and that can sell your film. Like look to see if, the sales agent took on similar films, because I've seen it a few times where filmmakers make a year deal with a sales agent and then nothing happens, and then their film's a year old, and it makes it a lot harder.
I think you got to be in control of your own destiny, especially on the indie side. I loved when Sundance had this great program for a little bit, Sundance Creative Distribution Services, and 2 great case studies is First Girl I Loved and Thunder Road, and we've all heard Jim Cummings' story, and it's amazing. But the part people forget is he was working on his audience for 7 years. It wasn't an accident. The people in France already knew who he was, and that's the long game. Are you talking to your audience outside of that kind of 1% of the films that get those big splashy sales? No one knows the audience better than the filmmaker. So start working towards that on day one, in every decision you make, from the script to the casting and along the way, and be okay with sometimes turning a deal down. One of the films we did last year during the pandemic, we sold it to an AVOD, 50% of the budget. They played it for 2 months. And of course the investor's like, yeah, but that's only 50% of my money. But I was like, I got it back in 4 months. I told you 18 to 36 month cycle. And we got every right back after those 2 months. So now we just sold it again. And now I have another 12 months to do it. So look at these alternative, distribution services and things like that, and you can be in control of your own destiny if you build it right. if you understand from the beginning. Sometimes it's like, I don't say don't make your film, but every film has its right budget. Some of my films I'm able to say is profitable, not because it made a ton of money, but it made enough.
And it comes, in some ways, it comes down to the idea of the team again, what Jonathan has been getting at, right? That if you're not good at sales, you're might be an excellent writer, director, but that doesn't mean you're good at sales. So you got to find somebody who's, and the exchange may not say yes, an agency may not say yes. So you are going to have to team up with that person who not only you feel can do it, but who actually enjoys doing it, right?
I think that's, I know we're signing off. I will say that one thing that hasn't been lost to me 30 years in, I still feel privileged to be doing what I'm doing. I feel like a kid in a candy store, and that never gets old. And every once in a while, quite frequently, I'm reminded working with such wonderful artists, and frankly, seeing, some of you folks who I've known from over the years, it's a reminder of why I'm in the business, and we get to work in the arts, it's quite, remarkable.
All right, that's a good positive note to end on. That's great. Well, that's what we were looking for. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this. It's some good food for thought for everybody who chimes in. We'll be in touch, and take care, and best of luck with your upcoming projects, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.